In this video, we are going to examine domain and range on graphs, as well as getting information off of a graph. So the first thing that I want to remind everyone of is that domain is the set of x values. X values that are allowed to go in, x values that you see being used. So what you do is you look at the x-axis. You look at the x-axis and you're going to go from left to right, from the small end to the large end. Similarly, range is the set of y values. And you're going to look at the y-axis. And y-axis, you go small to big. So you look up the y-axis. Okay? Whenever we write our answers, we're going to use interval notation. Okay? So interval notation is going to use brackets and parentheses. Not included is parentheses, and included is brackets. Okay, so that's how you do interval notation, and it always goes small, comma, up to big, whether it's x values or y values. And remember, whenever you have infinities, we're going to use parentheses on those. Okay, those are all the rules. So let's take a look at our first graph. I think I'm going to zoom way in so we can definitely take a look at these graphs nice and large here. So domain is x, so let's go to the small end of the x-axis. There is no graph at negative 10, 9. The smallest x being used is negative 5, and that's a closed bubble. So I'm going to use a bracket from negative 5, comma, and sometimes it helps if I exaggerate the arrow. This is going like this, like this, like this. So is the largest x being used 3 or 4 or 5? Well, since it keeps going, it's going to keep using bigger and bigger. That's going to be infinity with parentheses. Notice how I'm looking at the x-axis and making tick marks on that. Okay, let's take a look at the range. The range is going to be the set of y values. So let's look at the y-axis way down at the smallest. Does this graph stop at negative 10? It goes way down. It's going to go far, far, far down the y-axis, all the way to negative infinity. Put a parenthesis on your infinity. Okay, then you look up the y-axis. Up the y-axis. What's the largest y value being used? The largest y value is 1, 2, 3. There are no y's above 3. So 3 is the largest y, and since it's being used, we're going to bracket it up. We're going to walk through a whole page of these. We're going to practice this tomorrow. Hopefully you'll feel like you're much better at it. Okay, number 2. Let's take a look at the domain. Domain means x. The smallest x being used is negative 3. Negative 3. Since that's a closed point, let's bracket it up because it's using it. And the largest x is 5, the largest x. Again, it's helpful to exaggerate the graph, even go off the graph paper. Up, 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 and away. So 7 is being used, and 8, and 9, and 10. But even past 10, all the way to infinity. Infinity always gets a parentheses. All right, let's look at the y-axis, the smallest y being used. There's no y's down here at negative 10. The smallest y being used is negative 5. Let's bracket that up because it's touching negative 5. And if you go up the y-axis, yep, 0 is being used, 1's being used, graph is going up. This is going up, 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 all the way to positive infinity. Okay. I know I'm looking on the y-axis, but I'm trying to see if there's places that the graph is being used there. Is 5 being used? Yeah, it's way over here. This is the point 8, 5. So 5 is being used on the graph somewhere. All right. It's going to get a little more interesting here because I see a hole. All right, but let's start on the x-axis all the way to the left. The smallest x being used is negative 4. And since that's closed, let's bracket it up, comma. So is negative 3, negative 2, 0 being used? Are all the x's being used? Well, no, hang on. What x is this right here? 4 has an open bubble. 4 is not being used. So we're going to put a 4 with parentheses because 4 is not being used. But wait, is there more graph? Yes, so then you're going to say union, and we're going to start, should I start at 5? No, because what about all these decimals here? So you start at 4, right where you left off, with parenthesis, parenthesis. That means I'm using all the numbers except I'm not using 4. So I'm just going to put a little note right here. This is how you state a whole. Stop at 4, start at 4, but since it's parentheses, we're not using 4. And then we keep going, 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 all the way to infinity. All right, let's take a look at the y-axis for range. Okay, so we look at the y. There's no graph down here, so we're looking for y numbers. The smallest y being used is 0. Okay, we're looking up the y-axis. If it helps to write the coordinates of this point, okay, then look at that number. That's a 0. So 0 is touching with the brackets. And then we go, go, go. Is it all the way to infinity? Well, hang on. There's this hole here, right? There's a hole right there at the point 4, 5. So is 5 being used? No. So I have to stop at 5 since it's open, parentheses. But then I'm going to say union, start back up at 5, and go all the way to infinity. This graph goes higher, higher, higher to infinity. It doesn't go very fast. It's slowly going up to infinity. Okay, I am definitely going to exaggerate and extend this graph a little bit here because I want to make sure I understand it's going forever that way, it's going forever that way, just to see the x values a little clearer. So the smallest x value, is it -2? Is it -5? -10? Oh, it looks like it's going forever. So negative infinity all the way. Using 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to positive infinity. There is another way to write that. If you don't want to write negative infinity to positive infinity, you can instead write all reals. A little faster. Either one is perfectly acceptable. Okay, how about the range? The smallest y value being used. So you look down at the bottom of the graph. I don't see any graph down here. There's no graph. Here's the bottom of the graph. That y value is -2. Closed point, so brackets, -2. Is their graph going higher, 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 all the way to infinity with parentheses? All right, let's take a look at number 5. Maybe I'll do a little exaggerating just so that I make sure I realize this goes all the way forever off the graph paper. The smallest x for domain. The smallest x value being used, is it -10? No, I see an arrow. It keeps going, going, going. So negative infinity. And let's see, the graph keeps going along the x-axis. There's more graph, more graph, more graph. Is the graph at 10? Absolutely. All the way to positive infinity. What do we always put on the infinities? A parentheses. If you didn't want to write that, remember how you could write it? You could write it as all reals. Maybe we should write with the interval notation till we get the hang of seeing things and knowing the answer so fast. Okay, let's take a look at the range. The smallest y value being used. Is their graph at -10? Yes, but it keeps going down, down, down. The smallest y value. The smallest y value being used would be negative infinity. Okay, is their graph at -8, -5, -3? There's graph at 0. There's graph at 1, 2, 3. What's the highest y value? Does this graph go forever? No, there's no graph up there. The highest value being used, wow, and it's being used a lot. There are a lot of points here. The highest y value is 5. Since it touches 5 so many times, we're going to include that for sure with a bracket. Okay, number 6 has something interesting here. It has a point on one end, and it has this dotted line. And I want everyone to make sure that they realize what this dotted line is. The graph is getting closer and closer to it. Closer and closer and closer. The dotted line means never approaching. Okay, so this is an asymptote. That's an asymptote. An asymptote is a line that the graph approaches but never quite touches. So let's examine the domain. And the smallest x value being used, it's getting closer and closer to -2. Does this graph actually touch -2? No, we just said it's going to get closer but never touch. So I'm going to officially start my domain at -2. But wait, I thought we just said it doesn't touch. So should I use a parenthesis or a bracket? We're going to use a parenthesis on that because it doesn't touch. -1, 0, 1. What's the largest x value being used? 5. And since that's closed, we'll bracket it up. How about the y-axis? The smallest y value being used? Well, it definitely goes past -10, -11, -12. Since there's an arrow, the smallest y is -infinity. What do we put on the infinities? Parentheses. Okay, how about the largest y? Does the graph use y's all the way up to positive infinity? No, there's no graph there. The largest y that this graph touches is -2. And since it's closed, we'll bracket it up. So here's a variety of graphs, and we examine their domain and range by looking at their picture. Let's see, what else are we going to do here? How about taking a look at a really large graph and answering some questions? So we kind of did this a little bit yesterday. Let's do it again. Okay, so we got an interesting graph here. I see a point. I see a hole. I see a local max, and then I see how it goes way, way down. Okay, maybe even exaggerate the graph. It goes down, down, down forever. Okay, let's answer some questions. So the first question is, what is the domain of f? Okay, so to answer that question, first I'm going to look at the x-axis and see what the smallest x being used. So let's go way to the left. Oh, I don't think there's any graph there. The smallest x being used is this point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5s have darker lines. 6, 7, 8. This is the point -8, comma 4. So the smallest x value being used is -8. Now, is it touching -8? Absolutely. So let's bracket that up. And then the graph goes and goes and goes and goes. Wait, there's a hole. Okay, where is that hole? 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes it helps people to label this point as -4, -2. So what x value is not being used? -4. How do we say a hole? Parenthesis or bracket on that one? Parenthesis. Okay, then we're going to continue because there's more graph. And let's start right where we left off at parenthesis -4. Stop at -4, start at -4, but wait, there is no graph. So then use parentheses. And then the graph goes and goes and goes and goes and goes forever. So x values will continue to be used all the way to infinity with parentheses. Okay? If any of this is unclear, make sure you ask. The y value for the range, the smallest y value being used, the smallest y. Wait, that's not the smallest one because look, this graph goes down, down, down. Okay, is -3 the smallest? No, because it goes down, down, down. I think the smallest y value is going to be -infinity. And infinities are always going to get parentheses. Okay, so now we're going to come up the y-axis. And here's where I really want you to sit up and pay attention. Does the graph use the y value of -2? Is -2 being used? And the answer is yes. What? I thought that's a hole. But over here, it's touching. Okay, so I'm just going to write a little note. -2 is being used. So even though there's an open bubble there, he's being used somewhere. So we're not going to stop. We're going to keep going. Is 0 being used? Yes, lots. Okay, all the way up, up, up. Is 4 the highest? Nope. 5, 6 is the highest. And since that's a closed, touching bubble, we're going to bracket it up. So this is kind of an interesting concept. Even though there's a hole somewhere, don't worry, he's being used somewhere else. Okay, kind of like up here, even though negative or positive 6 isn't being used on this side, it's being used over there, as long as it's being used somewhere. How about f of negative 4? Let's take a look at the graph. Go negative 4, and the answer is, did you say negative 2? Well, then you're wrong. What? Negative 4 is an open bubble. That is no solution there. Okay, how about f of 6? F of 6 is 1, 2, 3. Here's the point 6, comma 3. For what x values, now this is a different question. For what values of x does f of x equal a 4? So they want x values. X values means input, and 4 is the output. And when I say output, that means the y is 4. Okay, so I'm trying to find where do we have a 4 for the y? Well, here's one for sure, at x equals negative 8. But that's not the only spot. Here's another place, 1, 2, 3, 4, at the point 0, comma 4. So x can equal 0, and I would get an output of 4. And here's another one, at x equals 5. 3 places have 4 as the y value. Okay, a couple more questions. For what numbers x, what values of x, again we're looking for the x, is f of x 0? So now I'm trying to find where is the y 0. That's the output. Output. Where is f of x touching 0? Well, that's right here at these x-intercept places. So we've got one right here. X equals negative 6. I've got one right here. X equals negative 2. Does it touch 0 anywhere else? Yes, right here. 5, 6, 7, 8. X equals 8. There's 3 places where it equals 0. And then we have that weird question from yesterday. For what numbers is the graph less than or equal to 0? Okay, we have to make sure we look at the directions clearly. Yesterday it was greater, now it's going to be less. So I take out that fun little piece of paper, and I'm only going to show you the graph that is less or equal to 0. So let's cover up everything that's too high. We have graph here that's less. This graph is less. And this graph here, this is definitely less than 0. All that going that way. Okay, and it says equal. So that means I can use these points. I want to be less or equal. Okay, and so how are we going to say that whole section? I can't start listing all the answers. There's way too many to make a list. So I think I'll use interval notation from here to there. This is negative 6. And since it's a closed bubble, I can use negative 6 all the way to, well, I can't say that one. There's no graph there. I've just stopped. Let's say negative 4, parentheses, then we'll start back up at negative 4, and all the way to negative 2. And since negative 2 is equal, I'll bracket it up. Okay, but wait, that's not all the answer, because here's another piece of answer. Starting at that closed bubble, there's equal, and here's where the graph is less. So let's start at brackets 8 and go all the way to infinity with parentheses. Okay, I hope you feel a little bit better about domain and range and information from a graph.